A lot of you have been asking me about how I edit my videos, so I figured it was time to let you in behind the scenes and give you a look at some of my techniques, tactics, and share some of my tips with you about how I edit these motovlog videos. So if that's something you're interested in, whether you're looking to give this YouTube thing a go for yourself, or maybe you just want to make better vacation videos to share with your friends and family, then I have a lot of great tips to share with you. Stick around. Hi, I'm Tim Collins, and this is my YouTube channel, 40 Times Around. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about how I edit these motovlog videos, and I have a ton of information to share with you guys. So you might want to grab a coffee or something to drink, sit down, settle in. This is probably going to be a long video. So because there's so much information here, I'm going to split this up into 4 sections. Section 1, I'm going to talk about how I film, the settings I use, and how I organize my footage to get it ready to edit. Section number 2, I'm going to cover some frequently asked questions. In section number 3, I'm going to let you in on a big secret. What is, in my opinion, the most important aspect to a good motovlog. And in section number 4, I'm going to show you how it's done, give you some tips and tricks and things like that. And at the end, I'll show you a short finished product. So without further ado, let's jump in. Section 1, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how I film and what cameras I'm using. Now for the most part, I'm using this here, a GoPro Hero 7 Black. This works best for me. I also have a Nikon, which I'm using to film this. I use it for talking head stuff and some photography for Instagram. But we're not really going to talk too much about that. I'm going to talk mostly about the settings I use on my GoPro. Now I do have a motovlog setup video if you're interested in that. I'll leave a link in the description box down below. So most of the time with this GoPro, I'm shooting at 60 frames per second at 1080p. Sometimes I will shoot at 24 frames per second. It kind of depends on what you're going for. The 24 frames per second when you're on the bike is going to give you a more realistic motion blur. It'll feel a little more immersive and a little more realistic. I use the 60 frames per second because I like to slow down some of my footage after the fact, and shooting it in 60 frames and being able to slow it down in a 24 frame per second timeline allows me to get that really buttery smooth slow motion, especially for b-roll when I'm just getting shots of scenery off the bike. Especially this GoPro with the stabilization, it's just super smooth. It's like it's on a gimbal, but being able to slow it down makes it really dramatic. So 60 frames per second, 1080p. I personally don't bother with 4K because it takes so long to work with and it takes up so much space, and just in the amount of time I've been traveling over the last probably 9 or 10 months, I've accumulated, using 1080p, several terabytes of storage. So working with 4K just would be unreasonable for me. Now, I don't typically do any kind of color grading with my footage. I think the GoPro does a pretty good job of getting it fairly accurate. I might do a little touching up in the editing process if necessary, but usually not. So I don't use the Pro Tune settings. It just saves me a big step later on. If you want to get really advanced with this, you could set the Pro Tune settings and get into some color grading and things like that. That is beyond the scope of this video though. So here's a quick snapshot of the settings I'm using. 1080p, 60 frames per second, like I said. I usually leave it in linear mode, especially if I'm off the bike because it removes any kind of distortion. Sometimes I will use wide if I'm on the bike, but anything off the bike, it definitely looks distorted. Stabilization, of course, I leave that set on. Pro Tune off. This is just what works for me. You might want to play around with this if you want to color grade after the fact. And that's kind of it. Now, if you are hooking a mic up to the GoPro, of course you need that adapter. If you're doing it in your helmet, I found a lavalier mic works really well. I use the Purple Panda. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below too. But something to be aware of is that in your settings, once you plug in a microphone, you have to change the input settings to standard mic. I found that standard mic plus creates a lot of what's called peaking, and the audio is just going to sound really terrible if it's in your helmet because the microphone is so close to your mouth. However, if you have a shotgun mic attached to the top of your GoPro with a little mount, then you would want to most likely use standard mic plus. It's kind of a pain to keep track of that if you're on and off the bike constantly and talking to the camera all the time, but it's just something you have to deal with. Now, one more note on cameras and things like that. I used to have 2 GoPro Hero 7 Blacks. I would shoot at different angles simultaneously, line them up after the fact while I was editing, and It made the video slightly more dynamic, but it increased my editing time immensely. It was a lot to line up. Okay, this shot was taken on this camera and lines up with this shot that was taken on this camera, and it wasn't practical for me. So I ended up getting rid of the second GoPro, took some of that money to invest in other camera equipment. However, if you are using two cameras and you want to line them up, a nice little trick you can use is either honk the horn on your bike or clap your hands in a spot where both cameras can hear it while they're recording. When you get them in your timeline, there'll be a little spike on the audio track, and that'll be really easy to just line that up. For me, it's just simpler. I go with one GoPro. If I'm doing talking head stuff, that's on this camera. All my B-roll would most likely be done on the GoPro, and then also there would be a drone in there. So you have to kind of line all of that footage up in chronological order and figure all that out. The less cameras you're working with, the better off you're going to be. So that's kind of it for recording. Like I said, I only use the one camera for the most part, so organizing the footage is really easy. I just save them in files like this: National Parks trip, Big Bend, day 1, day 2, etc. And if I have multiple cameras, it would be camera 1, camera 2, etc. I try to, at the very least, every day organize my footage at the end of the day while it's fresh in my mind. But even if it was just like a 2 or 3 day trip or even a week long, that probably isn't necessary. You wouldn't need a computer with you. Just do all your filming and organize it when you get home. Okay, section 2, frequently asked questions. The question I get pretty frequently is what program I'm using to edit. And of course, we're going to jump into that in a minute. But I do use Adobe Premiere. I started out with iMovie, and the logical next step would have been for me to jump into Final Cut, but for whatever reason, I wanted to get into the Adobe suite because I wanted to use Photoshop and Lightroom and a couple other of the programs that work in that family of programs. So I work with Adobe Premiere Pro, and I'm very happy with it. It did take quite a bit for me to learn it, but I mean, I feel like I'm only really scratching the surface of the full capabilities of this program, but it does what I need it to do and more. So while we're talking about the editing program I use, is probably a good time to tell you what computer I'm using, and that is the MacBook Pro 15-inch, 500 gigabyte. It's the model from 2018. I've been very happy with it. It's super portable. The battery lasts a long time. It's got plenty of power. I have found that video editing is an incredibly intensive process on a computer, and a lot of laptops are not cut out for that workload. And I have fried computers in the past. You need something pretty powerful if you're going to be getting into some heavy video editing. This computer has worked great for me. It's not the only option. I do enjoy working on a Mac. But there are lots of great options out there. I'm just very happy with this one. I've had it for a few years and it's still working great for me. So that's kind of it for the questions I have for the frequently asked questions section. If you have anything else, questions, concerns, etc., make sure you leave them down below. I'll make sure to either answer them, or if I'm getting certain questions frequently enough, maybe I'll do a follow-up video to this in the future. And that brings us to section number 3, the most important aspect, in my opinion at least, of a good moto vlog. Music. This is the one thing that will make or break a video. And I think that music is just so important. It should help you tell a better story, paint a better picture of the experience. You don't want music that's going to detract from the beautiful images you're showing or the story you're telling. So music is key. Now, I used to use the YouTube audio library. There are a lot of great songs on there for free. It is important that you make sure there's no royalties on the songs you're using, that you are allowed to use it in a YouTube video. So like I said, I used the YouTube audio library for a while. Eventually, I got tired of that and I upgraded. And now I'm using this really awesome website called Epidemic Sound. I will leave a link in the description box down below. That is an affiliate link, so I get credits towards more time with their website and things like that if you use it. So if you're going to check it out, make sure you use that link. It does help me out. Epidemic Sound is really cool. It has a great search feature and just a lot of awesome music. It makes it really easy to find the perfect song for what you're looking for to fit the emotion, the feel, the genre of the music you're looking for. Everything's really easy to sift through. It's a massive library of music, so that having those kind of search options really helps narrow things down. A lot of times when I'm going through and looking for music for a video, I might find a song that I think, wow, I really like this, but it's not perfect for this video. So I have a file, I just drop songs in. When I find something I like, I put it in a file, and then I have that. And later on I'll be editing a different video and I'll be thinking, oh, I found the perfect song for that, and it's in that file. I don't have to go back to Epidemic Sound to go find it again. So while we're talking about that, let's take a quick peek at that, and we'll find a song for the video I'm going to be working on. I'm looking for something kind of adventurous, a little bit exciting and dramatic. The video we're going to be editing is some of the footage I have from the Arizona BDR. It was a really aggressive off-road, grueling kind of trip, and I want to really capture that emotion. So we're going to just jump into Epidemic Sound, take a little look around, and try to find a good song for this video. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into Adobe Premiere Pro, and I'll give you a quick look at how everything is done and share some of my tips and tricks with you. So here we are in Adobe Premiere Pro. There are lots of videos that will give you an overview of how this program works and what all these different things are. If you're not familiar with this, just try to hang on, and I'm just going to show you the basics. Anything beyond that is definitely beyond the scope of this video. This program is massive and there's so much you can do with it. It's really cool. But first, I'm going to go over here and import everything into this little box. If you have several cameras and different days and all of that, all in the same file, if you just upload the file into this box, everything will be organized in the files you have it on your desktop. Now, once I'm in here, I set to organize by name because that will essentially put it in chronological order. Next thing I'm going to do is drop my music into the timeline. Now, here is one of my big tips. What I'm going to do is play the song while it's selected here in the timeline, and then just listen for the beat. You want to match to that, and anytime you hear the beat, just hit the M key. This is where your cuts should be, and it will leave a little mark on the file. That way you can line up your cuts exactly to that. It makes it really easy after the fact once you've done this throughout the entire song. Now, you don't want the cuts to be so fast that it gives you a headache, but you don't want to just drag everything out either. Some shots will be stretched out for impact, and that's okay, but you do want things to just generally move at a decent pace. Pacing is a big part of editing. Now you can go ahead and drop all your footage in over the song and start sifting through things and finding what's usable, what you want to use, where you want to cut, and just start going through it. It's going to take a long time, and you'll probably go through it several times until it's polished and perfect and exactly the way you want. If you do use Adobe Premiere, there are a few shortcuts that will help you out. By hitting the C button, you can select the cut tool without having to move your mouse over to it. Hitting the V will select the select tool, and hitting A will select everything to the right of whatever file you click on. Another thing that saved me a ton of time was Command and Delete. This will delete the clip you have selected and pull everything from the right all the way to the left, buttoning everything up nice and neat as if it was never there. Another tip is make sure you have this little magnet on. This will make things a lot easier when you're cutting and moving things around, and it'll just pull the files all the way together. You won't have any weird, two frame gap in there. So now we're just going to have at it with the filtering process. This takes the most time, removing the unusable or less impressive footage. A French writer and poet said it best, and these are words to live by. It seems that perfection is attained not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing more to remove. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Less is more. Shoot for the shortest video that will tell your story. It is better to leave people wanting more than to leave them wishing it would just be over already. So let's go ahead and edit this video. So we're just about done here. I do want to take a quick second to tell you just a few more things about Adobe Premiere and a few more things I do to my videos before they're entirely done. One of them being reframing shots. If you select the clip you want and come over here to this little box, you can zoom in and out, move left and right, and do a whole bunch of stuff over here. If a shot is not quite lined up correctly, this is where I go to fix it. Another thing I do is adding graphics, things like text graphics, introduction type things, titles to the videos, and some rolling credits, things like that. That's all done over here, and I have downloaded some graphic templates that I use for my videos. And the final thing I want to talk about is transitions. These are not to be overdone with. I really try to keep these to a minimum. Just cutting from scene to scene is a great transition, but sometimes you want to let people know that a little bit of time has passed, or maybe just give a more dramatic crossfade if you're showing some scenery. These are the two I use most often. Fade to black, which I use to show passing time, and crossfade, which I show to just kind of show this is a continuation of the same thing, but from a different perspective or angle. And that is kind of it with the transitions. There's a lot of other ones you could get into. I'm not going to get into that today. So that's it. We're all done editing, exporting, and all of that. Let's take a quick look at the finished product. So that is just a short version. The longer version I put out earlier this week. You can go ahead and check that out. I'll leave a link in the description box down below. That's the long version of this video. So yeah, that's it. It's really easy. It's a little time consuming, but it is a lot of fun once you start getting into it. So if you have any questions whatsoever, leave them in the comments down below. Like I said, if you want to check out my moto vlog setup, I will leave a link to it right here, and you can go ahead and check that out. That is it for me today. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff, and check out some of my other videos. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.